The following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
Hello and welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, as we continue to focus on the Israel-Hamas conflict. In a major breakthrough in the ongoing Israel-Hamas war, the two sides late Wednesday night announced a highly anticipated deal that would allow at least 50 hostages and scores of Palestinian prisoners to be released while offering the besieged Gaza residents a 4-day truce after weeks of relentless bombings and ground assault. After several weeks of Qatar-brokered negotiations, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet approved the truce accord after an all-night meeting in which he told his ministers this was a difficult decision but the right decision. The cabinet sign-off was one of the last stumbling blocks after what US officials described as 5 extremely excruciating weeks of talks. Hamas released a statement welcoming the humanitarian truce and said it would also see 150 Palestinians released from Israeli jails. Hamas said the resistance is committed to the truce as long as the occupation honors it. On the 7th of October, Hamas terrorists carried out an unprecedented cross-border attack, the worst in Israel's history, that left 1,200 people dead, most of them civilians. The Hamas terrorists went on to capture some 240 Israeli and foreign nationals, including elderly people, women and young children, and they're currently being held hostage in Gaza. On the day of those attacks itself, Israel declared war on Hamas, vowing to bring the hostages home and to destroy the group. It launched a bombing campaign and ground offensive in Gaza, which, according to the Hamas government, has killed at least 14,100 Palestinians, including thousands of children. While Israel has agreed to a 4-day pause in the fighting in Gaza, it has made it clear that this temporary truce by no means would be the end of the war. What it has promised, though, is this: for every 10 additional hostages released by Hamas, there would be an extra day's pause in the Israeli campaign. The negotiations that have led to this agreement involved the US Central Intelligence Agency, Israel's overseas spy agency Mossad, Egyptian intelligence, and leaders in Doha, Cairo, Washington, Gaza, and Israel. Officials say 3 Americans, including a 3-year-old girl, are among the 50 hostages who've been earmarked for staggered release that begins from Thursday. US President Joe Biden said he was extraordinarily gratified that some of these brave souls will be reunited with their families once the deal is fully implemented. Qatar's foreign ministry too confirmed the deal, saying a number of Palestinian women and children detained in Israeli prisons would be released in exchange for the hostages. Now, ahead of the Israeli cabinet vote, Netanyahu had faced criticism from within his right-wing coalition, some of whom thought the deal gave way too much to Hamas. Hardline Minister for National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir signaled that he would vote against the agreement, saying it should include the release of Israeli soldiers as well, something that Hamas is bitterly opposed to. But with dozens of families in Israel who are desperate beyond words to have their loved ones back home, the Netanyahu government ultimately set aside any misgivings. Israel's hawkish defense minister Yoav Gallant said before the meeting that he had won an assurance that the deal would not spell the end of the war against Hamas. In a statement, the Israeli government said, and I quote, "Israel will continue the war in order to return home all of the hostages, complete the elimination of Hamas, and ensure that there will be no new threat to the state of Israel from Gaza." The deal is expected to bring some desperately needed respite for the beleaguered Gazans, some of whom have expressed the hope that this agreement may pave the way for longer truces or even a total ceasefire in the near future. US officials say they are hoping that the deal would also lead to a full pause in fighting along the Israel-Lebanon border between Israel and Hezbollah, which, like Hamas, is backed by Iran. Large parts of Gaza have been flattened by thousands of airstrikes, and the territory is under siege with minimal food, water and fuel allowed in. Almost 7 weeks into the war, Israel has come under intense international pressure to implement a humanitarian ceasefire. But in recent days, it has pressed its offensive further into northern Gaza. At Jabalia's Indonesian hospital, the Hamas-run health ministry said Israeli strikes had killed dozens. The Israeli army later said its troops had directly targeted the source of fire from within the hospital. Israel maintains Hamas uses medical facilities to hide fighters and as bases for its military operations, making them legitimate military objectives, while insisting it does everything possible to minimize civilian casualties. The question is, while the release of the hostages is more than welcome, how much relief is this 4-day truce likely to give to the Palestinians in Gaza? And can this deal indeed pave the way for a gradual reduction in hostilities between Israel and Hamas?
Outside, there is a lot of nonsense talk, as if after we cease for the release of the hostages, we will stop the war. So I would like to clarify, we are at war, and we will continue to fight until we reach all our goals. In war, there are stages, and also in the returning of hostages, there are stages. But we will not let go until we reach the absolute victory and until we bring them all back.
Since the escalation of the current round of Palestinian-Israel conflict, China has constantly called for a ceasefire and made unremitting efforts to calm down the situation, protect civilians, and carry out humanitarian assistance. We welcome the temporary ceasefire agreement reached by the relevant parties and hope that it will help the humanitarian crisis, de-escalate the conflict, and ease tensions.
I welcome the agreement between Hamas and Israel that should lead to the release of hostages and pausing the hostilities and enable the delivery of humanitarian aid.
This morning, I have received 2 delegations, one of Israelis that have family held hostage in Gaza, and another one of Palestinians that have family in prison in Israel. They are suffering so much, and I've heard how much both of them suffer. Wars do that, but here we are beyond wars. This is not war, this is terrorism.
All right. So to dissect this very significant breakthrough, we are now joined by Ambassador Arthur Lenk, former Israeli diplomat. He joins us live from Israel. Lev Aaron is with us. He's an Israeli columnist and journalist and former coordinator of the India-Israel Parliamentary Friendship League. And completing the panel tonight is our Indian guest, Major General Sudhakarji, defense and geopolitical expert. Gentlemen, welcome back to Global Lens. Ambassador Arthur Lenk, if I could start with you, it would perhaps be an understatement to say that this deal comes as a huge relief, and I would say not just for Israel and the families of the hostages who've been waiting with bated breath for their loved ones to come back home, but indeed for the entire world that has been hoping and praying for a de-escalation in hostilities. How significant is this breakthrough according to you? And even though Israel maintains that this does not by any stretch of imagination mean the end of the war, how do you see it impacting Israel's ongoing campaign, one way or the other?
Yeah, good evening, Neha. It's good to be with you again. It's a nerve-wracking time in Israel. It has been for 7 weeks, and it very much is yesterday and today and clearly in the coming days, while we're all waiting to see these women and children that will come home and hopefully they'll be alive. Hopefully they'll be healthy and physically and in mind, and they will be back with their loved ones. But it's just a start, isn't it? If it's 10 today and 10 tomorrow and 50 this week, there's still 200 Israelis nearly. The fathers of some of these children will stay behind. And and Hamas will rearm. So I'm glad people are coming home. That's the right thing. It's good. But this issue isn't resolved. It's not behind us. And there are big challenges because it almost feels like terror pays, doesn't it? And that can't happen.
All right. Certainly, the war is far from over. But like I said, this is a major breakthrough, the first that we've seen since the beginning of the war 7 weeks ago, and comes as huge relief to all parties. And like I said, even the world is heaving a sigh of relief because we all want to see an end to this war that has already killed way too many people. But let me go across to Lev Aaron. Lev, what we know so far is this. Thursday onwards, the release of 50 hostages is going to take place in a staggered manner in exchange for a 4-day truce in the fighting in Gaza and in exchange for the release of 150 Palestinians who are in Israeli jails, mostly women and children, I believe. What Israel has also said is for every additional 10 hostages released, there will be one more day of truce. You know, some very interesting behind the scenes details have emerged in some sections of the American media, for example, about what went into these what have been described as excruciating negotiations that lasted close to 6 weeks. One of those interesting developments that has been quoted is when recently President Biden in San Francisco, attending the APEC summit, called the emir of Qatar and said, your time is up. The deal has to be closed now. What more can you share with us about what really went on behind the scenes in these last 6 to 7 weeks?
Okay, so I think the fact that we as Israelis, we got quite, let's say, a fair deal is also thanks to the ground assault, because right now Hamas feels that it is in a real danger. And this is what the IDF said from day one. They said if we have a successful ground assault, we will get a better deal from Hamas. So the gap between what was offered in the beginning and what we get now is not that huge, but it is still a bit better. So this is one thing. The second thing is that in a democracy, the concrete cry of the families of the hostages is stronger than the abstract geopolitical danger of Hamas in power in Gaza. And they became quite a constituency, the families, and also all of us, that we, even if they're not our, let's say, they're not our brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers, still we all feel terrible that our Israelis are now in Hamas hostage. We just try to imagine what nightmarish situation they are now. And this is causing us, many Israelis, to also to push the government to launch a deal with Hamas, even if we want the destruction of Hamas in Gaza in the longer run. And so in a way, from the Israeli side, I think we understood that only by the military power of Israel, we are not able to bring them home. The 200-something people who are there. We simply cannot. We don't know where they are. And in some cases, we know where we are, but we don't have the means to bring them without killing too many people. And on the other hand, I feel that Hamas felt each and every day that it loses commanders of its army, and also the legitimacy among Palestinians inside Gaza. So we needed these 40-something days for Israel and Hamas to digest that they need a deal, and they need a deal that politically can work for both the Israeli domestic politics and Hamas.
All right. Major General Sudhakarji, let me ask you this. Since the war began on the 7th of October. The international community has been accused, and I would say rightly so, of having failed miserably and just acting as a mute spectator as thousands and thousands of people continued to die. Of course, it all began with the massacre in Israel and then the killings of Palestinians on the other side. This is the first breakthrough we've seen in this war. Also, a big win perhaps for global diplomacy, given how so many countries were involved in these negotiations, not just Israel and Hamas, but Qatar and Egypt and the United States and other players in the region. How significant is this breakthrough according to you? Apart from the fact that 50 hostages are going to be released and 150 Palestinian prisoners are going to return home as well, what do you think this 4-day truce in the fighting or 4-day pause in the fighting is likely to really mean? What impact is it likely to have on Israel's ongoing campaign?
Neha, good evening. Thank you for getting me to your show. As I understand, your question has got multiple parts, but I'll divide them primarily to two main headings. One is about the truce, the ceasefire, and the second is about the impact on the campaign. You see, in the history of military warfare, perhaps this is for the first time, to the best of my knowledge and understanding, that a truce has been established in such a short time frame. Kudos to the diplomatic efforts by multiple stakeholders and compliments to one and all of both the warring parties. But essentially, to answer the second part, which is the most important part, the impact on the ongoing campaign, I would like to address the issue in the following manner. Firstly, it has got a global perspective, a regional perspective, and a local perspective. And the second paradigm, or let's say the y-axis, has got a short-term, a mid-term, and a long-term perspective. When I talk about the global perspective, partly it will answer one segment of your question, is that in spite of so much of effort, 6 weeks have passed by, why the global order has taken so much of time to bring about ceasefire and free the captive hostages on either side. Hostages, the Israelis in the Palestine with the Hamas, and the Palestine people with the Israelis or the soldiers. I personally feel that the existing architecture of the global apex organizations have become defunct. And given the fact after the League of Nations way back in 1949 or 40s, they having collapsed, the United Nations came into existence. Ever since then, be it the 1.0 Cold War or 2.0 Cold War, I think the United Nations General Assembly and the Security Council have actually decayed in their effectiveness. So it highlights it's about time that we need to widen the scope of the representation to represent the global order much more comprehensively. One. Number two. The second point is that there is a cause and there is an effect. I'm not going to write to war and write in war under different kinds of acronyms, but there is enough substance under these two subheadings, right to war and right in war. You see, unless the trigger had happened, the IDF would have never invaded. But the trigger has got some kind of a long pending issue which needs to be addressed, which comes onto the other part of my paradigm is the short, mid, and long term. When we talk about the long outstanding issue, historical issue, which needs to be settled, it brings me to one highlight that Israel today has gone in for the offensive or has invaded Gaza as a kind of a reprisal to what the Hamas have done. But have they announced formally the military aim? Any military offensive undertaken by any force in the world, they always commence their operation with outlined, crystallized, and absolutely defined military aim. While the military aim in the
Israel keeps saying our military aim is to wipe out Hamas. That's all we are told.
Yeah, I'm coming to that. Their military aim, I as a military commander, as a general officer, I personally feel that a right to war, Israel has got the right to go to the war. Terrorism in no account, no profile can be accepted in any order in 21st century under the paradigm of rules-based order. They have the right to go to the war, and when they go to the war, the military aim is so far articulated as they will destroy the Hamas. When they talk about destroying the Hamas, what I understand as a military leader is that the leadership structure, that is the top leadership, the middle rung, and the low rung leaders, they should be taken into account. Number two, the logistic basis must be destroyed. Number three, the command, control, communication, and coordination centers, they must be actually destroyed. Until that happens, I don't think they would have achieved the military aim. There is a secondary component, Neha, if you allow me another minute.
Right, very
is
quickly,
that
sir.